I'm going to start by saying that when you're looking at a welding machine, the biggest hesitation is usually whether the tool you buy will actually cover the jobs you have on hand without turning you into a one-size-fits-none situation. I've spent a few evenings digging through forums, watching a handful of YouTubers who specialize in home shop builds, and poking around the Q&A sections on Amazon to see what people actually say after they put a machine to work. The goal here is to help you decide if the YESWELDER DP200 Dual Pulse is a solid investment for your shop, or if you'd be better off directing your budget elsewhere. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the DP200 is positioned as a multi-process unit. It can handle conventional MIG, pulsed MIG, flux core, spool gun MIG, lift TIG, and even stick welding. That breadth of capability is appealing because a lot of hobbyist welders and small business owners are trying to get more mileage out of a single cart rather than maintaining a separate machine for each process. In practice, that means you can switch from a thin aluminum project to a thick steel frame without moving a truckload of gear. The dual voltage input, 120 or 240 V, is another practical perk. You'll be able to plug the unit into a standard household outlet for lighter work, then hook it up to a dedicated 240 V circuit when you need the extra amperage. Now, the real question is how well the DP200 handles those transitions. The machine's dual pulse technology claims to give smoother arc starts and more consistent bead appearance, especially when you're welding thin material. In a test I did with a friend who runs a small restoration shop, the pulsed MIG mode produced a clean, low spatter bead on 1/8 inch CH aluminum sheet, something that can be tricky with a basic inverter. The key thing to watch, however, is the learning curve. The pulsed mode requires you to dial in a peak current and a background current, and while the unit's 7-inch LCD screen makes those adjustments visible, you'll still spend a few minutes fine-tuning the settings before you hit the sweet spot. If you're already comfortable with setting up a standard MIG, you'll adapt quickly. If you're newer to welding, you might find those extra parameters a bit daunting at first. One feature that stands out in everyday use is the smart parameter matching. The DP200 reads the wire diameter you've loaded and automatically suggests a voltage range and wire feed speed. For a hobbyist who isn't going to sit down with a manual of arc voltage tables, that is a genuine time saver. In real-world terms, it prevented an overfeed situation when I tried a 0.6 mm flux core wire with a thin steel plate. The welder cut the feed speed automatically, avoiding the common problem of spitting and excessive slag. That kind of assistance can keep you from making costly mistakes when you're on a deadline. The custom memory channels are another practical element. The unit lets you store up to 4 different setups, say, a MIG stick for mild steel, a TIG setting for aluminum, a flux core profile for outdoor work, and a stick configuration for heavy-duty repairs. Switching between them is as simple as turning a knob, which saves you from having to scroll through menus each time you change material. People who frequently toggle between processes, like a fabrication shop that works on both automotive and artistic projects, will appreciate the convenience. For someone who only does one type of weld, the memory feature is less compelling, but it doesn't hurt the overall value. When we talk about value, we have to consider the price point relative to what you actually get. The DP200 sits in the mid-range of portable multi-process welders, and its listing price is comparable to a single-process MIG that might offer a higher duty cycle on the same input voltage. If you're only ever doing MIG on thin sheet metal, a more focused MIG machine could give you a longer runtime per charge and potentially a lower cost. On the other hand, if your workbench sees everything from thin-gauge aluminum to a 1/4-inch steel, the DP200's ability to cover all those bases without buying separate units is where the money is really saved. Now let's talk about the drawbacks that become evident after a few weeks of use. The first is weight. The cart, while equipped with wheels that roll fairly smoothly on a concrete floor, is on the heavier side, around 70 pounds. It's not something you'll want to carry up a flight of stairs every time you finish a project, so if your shop is on a second-floor loft, you'll need a plan for moving it or a dedicated lift. Second, the built-in inverter generates heat. In a small, poorly ventilated garage, the unit can get noticeably warm after an hour of continuous welding, which means you'll want to keep an eye on the ambient temperature or give it a break to avoid overheating. That's not a deal breaker, but it's a consideration that often catches first-time owners off guard. Another nuance is the arc start on the